That night I sat in the glass conference room on the 47th floor, across from my billionaire husband. On the screen behind him was a payroll spreadsheet showing $480,000 in work bonuses for the same woman. On the table in front of me sat only a thin envelope he pushed my way. He thought I would sign the silence agreement inside and disappear, but that envelope just turned me into the worst nightmare his billion-dollar empire has ever seen. My name is Madison Lewis. I am 36 years old, a spatial designer for Northline Habitat Studio, and I have spent the last decade of my life creating environments that make people feel safe, welcomed, and understood. I know how lighting affects mood. I know how the texture of a chair can make a difficult conversation easier. But as I sat in the glass conference room on the 47th floor of Harman Vertex Labs that Tuesday night, I realized there was no amount of design theory that could soften the jagged edge of the reality in front of me. The room was freezing. That was the first thing I noticed. It was a deliberate kind of cold, the sort that keeps meetings short and negotiations brutal. The air conditioning hummed with a low, aggressive vibration that seemed to rattle inside my teeth. Across the table from me sat the man I had married 7 years ago on a warm beach in Santa Barbara, Wade Harman, the founder of this fintech empire, the man who had once promised me that we were a team, a singular unit against the world. Now, he looked less like my husband and more like a shark in a bespoke Italian suit, his eyes devoid of anything resembling recognition. Next to him was his general counsel, a man whose name I barely registered, sitting with the posture of a gargoyle guarding a cathedral. They had called me here for what Wade had termed an urgent administrative matter regarding our estate planning. I had rushed over from a site visit, still wearing my work boots and a blazer covered in drywall dust. Thinking we were signing updated trust documents, I was wrong. The room was dim, illuminated mostly by the glow of the massive projection screen behind Wade's head. He had evidently forgotten to disconnect his laptop from the main display after his last meeting, or perhaps he simply did not care enough to check. The screen displayed an internal payroll dashboard, the kind of sensitive data that was supposed to be buried behind layers of encryption. My eyes adjusted to the glare, and my designer's brain began to process the visual information before my emotional brain could catch up. It was a spreadsheet, rows and columns of financial data. One column was labeled Work Bonus, another was labeled Recipient. I squinted slightly. The same name appeared over and over again. Riley Shaw. I knew the name. She was a mid-level product strategy analyst. I had seen her at the company holiday party 2 years ago, a quiet girl with dark hair who had spilled champagne on her dress and apologized profusely. I had helped her blot the stain with a napkin. On the screen, Riley Shaw was not a clumsy junior employee. She was a recipient of consistent, heavy financial injections. November 15th, $40,000. December 20th, $40,000. January 10th, $40,000. I let my eyes trace the column down. There were 12 entries in total, spanning the last 18 months, 12 payments of $40,000 each. I did the math instantly. $480,000, nearly $500,000 in work bonuses for a strategy analyst. I looked from the screen to Wade. He had not noticed me looking. He was busy arranging a single object on the mahogany table in front of him. It was a thin, cream-colored envelope. He placed it perfectly parallel to the edge of the table, then slid it across the polished wood until it stopped directly in front of my chest. "Here you go, Madison," Wade said. His voice was smooth, practiced. It sounded like the voice he used for investor calls, not the voice of the man who used to burn toast in our first apartment. "This is the last of it." I looked at the envelope, then I looked at him. "What is this?" I asked. "It is a generous post-nuptial settlement," Wade said, clasping his hands on the table. "We are filing for divorce, Madison. It is best if we do this quietly. Irreconcilable differences. The paperwork is all inside. I have had legal draw up a comprehensive agreement. I had not asked for a divorce. We had dinner planned for Friday. We had just discussed vacationing in Cabo for the spring. My breath caught in my throat. A sharp intake of the refrigerated air. I reached out and opened the envelope. My fingers felt numb. clumsy. Inside, there was a stack of stapled papers titled Non-Disclosure Agreement and Mutual Release. Clipped to the front was a cashier's check. I looked at the number on the check, $75,000, and underneath the check, a small yellow sticky note with Wade's handwriting, the same handwriting that used to write love letters on napkins. It read simply, "Don't make this hard. You will be fine." I stared at the note, then I stared at the check. $75,000. My eyes shot back up to the screen behind him. $480,000. The math was so violent it felt like a physical blow. My husband, the billionaire tech mogul, had secretly funneled nearly $500,000 to a woman named Riley Shaw under the guise of work bonuses. And for me, the woman who had built his first pitch decks, the woman who had paid our rent when his company was just a laptop on a dining table, he had left an envelope with $75,000 and a demand for my silence. The silence in the room was thick, heavy with the weight of his arrogance. He truly thought this was how it worked. He thought he could purchase my life, my history, and my dignity for a fraction of what he paid his mistress to keep her happy. Wade saw me looking at the check and misunderstood my silence for compliance. "It is more than fair." "Madison," he said, leaning back, "think of it as a fresh start. You can invest it in your little design studio, but I need you to sign the NDA now. My team is very protective of my personal brand. We cannot have you becoming one of those bitter women on the internet telling sob stories. If you do not sign, my lawyers will ensure the litigation drains you until you have nothing left. They will protect me to the end." He paused, a small, pitying smile playing on his lips. "I am doing you a favor," he added. I did not explode. I did not scream. I did not throw the heavy glass pitcher of water at his head, even though every fiber of my being wanted to see it shatter against the wall. Instead, a strange, cold clarity washed over me. It was colder than the air conditioning. I looked at the number 480,000 on the screen. I looked at the 75,000 on the table, and suddenly, the last few months slammed into focus. The late nights, the new password on his phone, the way he had stopped looking me in the eye, the sudden business trips to Phoenix where Harmon Vertex did not even have an office. It all made sense. He wasn't just leaving me. He was discarding me. He had calculated my value, depreciated my worth, and decided I was a liability to be written off with a nominal fee. I looked directly at the camera lens of my own memory, speaking to the version of myself that would one day tell this story. If you have ever been sat down by the person you trust most in the world and had them slide a silence envelope across a table toward you, you know the specific sound your heart makes when it breaks. It does not sound like a crack. It sounds like a vault door slamming shut. Stay with me, because I did not sign. I looked at Wade. I looked at the lawyer who was checking his watch, bored by the destruction of a marriage. Wade thought he was ending a chapter. He thought he was closing a deal. He had no idea he was lighting the fuse on a bomb that would blow the foundation of his entire life apart. I picked up the pen lying on the table. Wade's eyes lit up, expecting the signature, expecting the capitulation, expecting the good wife to fade away into the background as she always had. I uncapped the pen, but I did not lower it to the paper. I held it in the air, poised like a dagger. I looked him dead in the eyes, my voice steady, matching the temperature of the room. "Before you think I will be silent. Wade, let me tell you exactly what I see from here." I placed the pen down on the table with a deliberate click, pushing the envelope back toward him, just an inch. Let me tell you about it from the beginning. To understand why the envelope felt like a bullet wound, you have to understand who Wade was before the suits, before the magazine covers, and before the 47th floor. You have to understand that I did not marry a billionaire. I married a man who owned 3 pairs of jeans and a laptop that overheated if he ran more than 2 programs at once. We met 10 years ago at a startup seminar in Portland. It was one of those events held in a repurposed warehouse that smelled faintly of damp concrete and ambitious coffee. I was 26, a designer trying to piece together a living freelancing for a small agency called Kestrel Frame Collective. I was tired. My feet hurt in my cheap boots, And I was only there because my boss wanted me to network with potential tech clients who might need branding. Wade was standing in the corner near the fire exit, looking like he wanted to bolt. He was not the polished shark I sat across from today. He was messy. His hair was too long, curling over the collar of a flannel shirt that had seen better days. He was holding a tablet like a shield. I walked over and asked him if he was hiding or plotting. He laughed, a nervous, boyish sound that made my chest feel warm. We ended up leaving the seminar early and walking to a dive bar 3 blocks away. We sat in a booth with peeling vinyl seats and drank cheap beer until 2 in the morning. That night, he told me about his vision. He did not talk about yachts or private jets. He talked about data. He had this idea for a platform that could make financial data transparent, accessible, and honest for the average person. He spoke with such intensity about smart cities and democratizing finance that his eyes actually shone in the dim bar light. I was captivated. I fell in love with the idealist who wanted to tear down the walls between the rich institutions and the regular people. I did not know then that he would eventually use those same walls to lock me out. We moved fast. Within 6 months, we were living together in a tiny, drafty loft in Denver. It was the kind of place where you had to run the water for 5 minutes to get it hot, and the radiator clanked like a dying engine all night. But we were happy. We were building something. Those early days were a montage of exhaustion and exhilaration. Wade spent 18 hours a day coding. He was obsessed. I would wake up at 3 in the morning and see the blue light of his screens illuminating the living room. His silhouette hunched over the keyboard like a pianist composing a symphony. I was not just a spectator, I was part of the build. When his early demos looked like spreadsheets from hell, I stepped in. I used my weekends and evenings to design the user interface for what would become Harman Vertex. I chose the color palette. I designed the logo, the very same logo that now hangs 10 feet tall in the lobby of the headquarters where he just asked for a divorce. I smoothed out the user experience so that investors could actually understand what his brilliant, chaotic brain was trying to do. We fought about money constantly, but it was the good kind of fighting. We fought about whether we could afford takeout or if we should just eat pasta again. We fought about the rent hike. I remember one night, we were sitting on the floor because we had sold the sofa to pay for server costs. Wade held my face in his hands, his thumbs tracing my cheekbones, and promised me that one day we would never have to look at a price tag again. We got married 3 years later on a beach in Santa Barbara. We could not afford a big venue, so it was just 30 of our closest friends, standing in the sand. My dress was off the rack, and Wade wore a suit he had bought on sale. When we exchanged vows, the ocean was roaring behind us, but I heard every word he said, everything I build, he had said, looking right into my soul, is for us. No matter how much I make, it is all ours. Madison. We are a single entity. I believed him. I believed him because I had seen him cry over failed code. I believed him because I had held him when investors slammed doors in his face. I believed him because we were a team. Then came the success. It didn't happen overnight. But when it hit like a tidal wave. The Series A funding round closed, then Series B. Suddenly, the trade magazines started calling him the young fintech genius. We moved from the drafty loft to a modern condo, and then, after the massive Series D round, we moved to Austin. The shift was subtle at first. Wade started buying better clothes. The flannel shirts were replaced by cashmere sweaters. The messy hair was tamed by a stylist who came to the house. He hired a driver because he said his time was too valuable to spend in traffic. I was proud of him. God, I was so proud. I stood next to him at galas, smiling until my face hurt. But slowly, the narrative began to shift. In interviews, reporters stopped asking me about the design of the product or my work with Northline. They started asking me what it was like to be the wife of a billionaire. They asked me how I kept the home fires burning while he changed the world. I was being rewritten. I was no longer the partner who had stayed up all night fixing his pitch deck. I was the supportive accessory. I was the rock at home, a passive object rather than an active participant. Wade began to change too. He stopped eating pizza on the floor. He started talking about levels. He would come home from meetings and complain that his old friends didn't understand his new reality. He started using words like leverage and optimization when talking about our weekend plans. But even then, there were moments where the old Wade surfaced. Nights when he would come home drunk on expensive scotch, loosen his tie, and collapse onto the sofa next to me. He would rest his head on my lap and tell me that none of the sycophants at work mattered, that I was the only one who knew the real him. I held on to those moments. I clung to them. I told myself that the money hadn't changed us. It had just changed our surroundings. I told myself that the penthouse in Austin with the view of the river was just a bigger version of our Denver loft. I trusted the bank account that we shared. I trusted the hours in his wedding vow. I was so naive. I was looking at the man I loved, blinded by the history we shared. I did not see that the man who had once obsessed over transparency was now building the most opaque walls imaginable. I remember one specific night about 5 years into the marriage. Wade was working late on a new encryption protocol for the platform. He was excited, manic almost. He told me this new code would make transactions untraceable for the highest-tier clients, ensuring absolute privacy. He called it a masterpiece of security. I congratulated him. I brought him coffee. I kissed his forehead and went to bed, leaving him alone with his genius. Looking back now, that memory feels like a knife twisting in my gut. I sat there in the conference room, staring at the $480,000 figure, and I realized something that made me nauseous. The security protocols he wrote that night. The encryption he was so proud of, that was likely the exact same system he used to hide the money he was funneling to Riley Shaw. He hadn't just built a business. He had built the perfect machine for betrayal, and I had cheered him on while he tightened the bolts. That day in the conference room, the nostalgia didn't soften the blow. It sharpened it. Every memory of him struggling, every memory of me supporting him, every dollar I had saved so he could code it all turned into fuel for the fire that was starting to burn in my chest. He thought I was the woman who stood in the background. He thought I was the supportive wife who would take $75,000 and fade away to preserve his reputation. But he forgot one thing. I was there when he built the foundation. I knew where the cracks were because I had helped pour the cement. And as I sat there, remembering the boy in the flannel shirt, I realized I had to destroy the man in the Italian suit. The code he wrote to hide his secrets was about to meet the woman who taught him how to make things visible. The shift in our marriage did not happen with an explosion. It happened with an arrival. It began the week Wade hired Lena Carrington as the new chief financial officer of Harman Vertex. Lena was a legend in the fintech world, or so Wade told me. She had a reputation for ruthless efficiency, the kind of woman who could trim a budget by 30% without blinking. I first met her at a company gala held at a museum downtown. She was striking, wearing a black dress that looked like it had been poured onto her body, her blonde hair cut in a sharp, asymmetrical bob that screamed precision. When Wade introduced us, he was vibrating with an energy I had not seen in years. He put his hand on the small of my back, but his eyes were fixed on her. "Madison, this is Lena," Wade said, his voice a little too loud, a little too eager. Honestly, if we had not brought Lena on board after Series B, I am not sure we would still be standing. She is a miracle worker. Lena smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. She looked at me the way a real estate developer looks at a charming but dilapidated building sitting on a prime lot. It was an appraisal. She shook my hand, her grip firm and cold. "It is a pleasure to finally meet the woman behind the scenes," Lena said. "Wade speaks of you often." There was a slight pause before the word often that made my stomach turn. It felt performative. I smiled back, playing the part of the supportive spouse, but the air between us felt charged with static. After Lena joined, the architecture of our daily life began to warp. It started with the schedule. Wade had always been busy. I understood that. I respected that. But suddenly, his calendar became a fortress I could no longer breach. Meetings ran late into the night, extending past 9, then 10, then midnight, then came the travel. Wade started taking sudden, unexplained trips. He would come home on a Tuesday evening, throwing clothes into a suitcase with frantic energy. "I have to go to Phoenix," he would say, avoiding my eyes. "Critical infrastructure meeting." Or it was Miami, or Toronto. Always cities where Harman Vertex had minor satellite offices or server farms. Always for reasons that sounded vaguely urgent but lacked specific details. "Just work." "Honey," he would say when I asked who he was meeting, "don't worry about it. It is boring technical stuff." But the most damning change was the phone. For 7 years, Wade's phone had been a piece of communal property. It would lie on the kitchen island, screen up, buzzing with notifications that we both ignored during dinner. I knew his passcode. He knew mine. If he was driving and got a text, he would ask me to read it to him. That stopped. Almost overnight, the phone became a physical extension of his body. When he set it down on the marble countertop, it was always face down, always. The screen was never visible. He changed the passcode, claiming company security policy required it. He enabled Face ID. He started taking it everywhere. If he went to the bathroom, the phone went with him. If he went to the home gym in the garage, the phone was in his pocket. I remember watching him once, standing by the sink to wash his hands. He balanced the phone on the edge of the porcelain, terrified to leave it in the bedroom where I was sitting reading a book. It is the behavior of a man guarding a bomb. The tension came to a head around our 7th anniversary. We had planned a trip to Napa Valley, just a quiet weekend to reconnect. I had booked the hotel months in advance, 2 days before we were supposed to leave. Wade came home with a look of practiced regret. "I can't go," he said, loosening his tie. "Strategy crisis. The board is demanding a full review. I have to stay in the city." I was crushed, but I tried to be understanding. I told him it was fine. I told him we would celebrate later, that Saturday night, the night we were supposed to be having a candlelight dinner. I was at home alone, drinking the wine we had meant to share. I was scrolling through Instagram, bored and lonely. I clicked on the Harman Vertex corporate account. There was a new story posted 3 hours ago. It was a boomerang video tagged at a rooftop bar in Miami. The caption read, "Team building never stops." The video showed a table full of cocktails. In the background, silhouetted against the city lights, was a man. He was wearing a distinctive linen jacket, a jacket I had bought for Wade in Italy. I knew the slope of those shoulders. I knew the way he held his drink. And sitting right next to him, leaning in close enough that their shoulders were touching, was a woman with long, dark hair. It wasn't Lena. Lena had short blonde hair. This was someone else. I froze. I played the 3-second loop over and over again. The man's head was turned toward the woman. It was intimate. It was undeniable. When Wade came home the next day, smelling of airplane air and expensive cologne, I tried to talk to him. I didn't scream. I asked him calmly why the company Instagram showed him in Miami when he was supposed to be in a strategy meeting in Austin. His reaction was immediate and explosive. He laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. "You are crazy." "Madison," he said, shaking his head. "That wasn't me. That was one of the sales guys. You are seeing things. You are spending too much time on your phone. You are getting that TikTok paranoia where every wife thinks her husband is cheating." He turned the accusation back on me. He told me I needed to focus on my own projects. He told me I was imagining drama because I was bored. He made me feel small, petty, and insane. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him so bad. So I swallowed my doubt. I told myself I was overreacting, but the cracks kept spreading. A week later, Wade fell asleep on the sofa while watching television. He had had a few scotches and was out cold. The room was silent. I was sitting in the armchair, sketching a layout for a client. Suddenly, Wade shifted in his sleep. He frowned, his face twitching in a dream. "Riley," he mumbled. It was soft, but clear. "Riley." I stopped drawing. I waited. He didn't say anything else, just let out a long sigh and turned over. Riley. It wasn't a name I knew. It wasn't a cousin. It wasn't a client he had mentioned. It was a name that hung in the air like smoke. after that night. I started watching him more closely, not with love, but with suspicion. I became an investigator in my own home. One morning, while he was in the shower, his Apple Watch was charging on the nightstand. It buzzed. I glanced over. The screen lit up with an email notification. The subject line was truncated, but I saw the words, bonus adjustment, R. Shaw. A minute later, another notification, calendar invite, performance review, R. Shaw, R. Shaw, Riley. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stood there, staring at the watch, feeling a cold dread wash over me, but then the voices of my mother and my friends echoed in my head. They had always told me that powerful men are complicated. They told me that men like Wade are busy, that they have worlds I cannot understand. He is a billionaire, Madison, they would say. He has thousands of employees. Don't be the jealous wife. Don't ruin a good thing because you are insecure. So I stepped back. I did not touch the watch. I convinced myself that R. Shaw was just an employee. I convinced myself that the bonus adjustment was standard business. I convinced myself that I was the problem. I tried to smooth over the rough edges of my intuition. I tried to be the perfect wife. I cooked his favorite meals. I stopped asking about his trips. I played the game. But a house with a cracked foundation makes noise. You can't ignore it forever. I remember standing in the kitchen one night, a few weeks before the envelope incident. Wade was asleep upstairs. The house was dark, illuminated only by the under-cabinet lighting I had installed myself. The Miele dishwasher was running, a soft, rhythmic swooshing sound. It was a sound of domestic perfection. Everything was clean. Everything was expensive. Everything was in its place. But as I stood there, leaning against the cold quartz island, I felt a vibration under my feet. It wasn't the dishwasher. It was the feeling of something giving way. I looked at the reflection of the room in the dark window. It looked perfect, but I knew better. The house was quiet, but the silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was heavy. It was waiting. I realized then that the quieter the house got, the louder the sound of the cracks became. I just didn't know yet that the whole ceiling was about to come down. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in late October. The light in our kitchen was golden and heavy, the kind of autumn sun that usually made the quartz countertops look warm and inviting. Wade was standing by the refrigerator, drinking an espresso. When his phone rang, it was a ringtone I knew well, the shrill, repetitive chirp assigned to the legal department. He answered it on the first ring, his face instantly tightening into a mask of irritation. He listened for 3 seconds, muttered a curse word, and walked out of the room toward his home office. The phone pressed hard against his ear. In his haste, he left his laptop open on the kitchen island. It was a sleek, silver machine, the fan humming quietly. The screen was bright, cutting through the afternoon sun. I walked over, intending to close the lid. I knew he hated it when dust got on the keyboard. It was a reflex, a habit born of 7 years of caring for his things. But as my hand hovered over the aluminum lid, I stopped. The screen was not displaying his email or a slide deck. It was displaying the back-end dashboard of the Harman Vertex payroll system. I recognized the interface immediately because I had helped design the color palette for the beta version 5 years ago. Dark mode background, stark white text, and data fields highlighted in a soft, clinical green. I looked at the open tab. It was the executive compensation overview. My heart did not race immediately. Instead, it slowed down, thumping with a heavy, deliberate rhythm against my ribs. Curiosity is a dangerous thing, but in a marriage that has gone silent, curiosity is the only way to hear anything at all. I leaned in. My eyes scanned the rows of data. I was looking for my own name. Years ago, when the company had first started making real money, Wade had told me he was putting me on the payroll as a strategic consultant. He had said it was for tax purposes, a spousal advisory fee to acknowledge the work I did behind the scenes. He had promised me that my contribution was quantified and recorded. I typed LEWIS into the search bar. No results found. I stared at the empty white box. There was no record of me, I tried my maiden name. Nothing. I scrolled through the list of external consultants. I saw names I didn't recognize. People receiving $5,000 here, $10,000 there for consulting fees that were likely just favors or retainer payments. But I was not there. The promise was a lie. I was a ghost in the machine I had helped build. My fingers hovered over the trackpad. The anger was a cold spark in my chest, but it was quickly replaced by a darker impulse. If I wasn't there, who was I? Remembered the name he had mumbled in his sleep. I remembered the initials on the Apple Watch notification. R. Shaw. I typed Riley into the search bar. The system loaded instantly. A profile popped up on the right side of the screen. Riley Shaw. Her employee ID photo showed a young woman with dark hair and a smile that looked too bright for a corporate headshot. Her title was listed as Product Strategy Analyst. Her base salary was $85,000 a year, a standard, respectable wage for her position. Then I clicked on the tab labeled Compensation History. The screen refreshed, and the air left my lungs. It was a waterfall of green numbers. November 15th. Performance work bonus. Executive discretion. $40,000. December 20th. Performance work bonus. Executive discretion. $40,000. January 10th. Performance work bonus. Executive discretion. $40,000. I scrolled down. The list kept going. February, March, April, every single month. Sometimes twice a month. There was a transfer of $40,000. It was systematic. It was rhythmic. I did the mental math. But the dashboard did it for me at the bottom of the column. Total discretionary bonuses, YTD. $480,000. I gripped the edge of the counter. $480,000. In less than 18 months, this was not a bonus. This was a second life. I clicked on the details of the most recent transaction. There was a mandatory field for justification, required by the auditing software. Most entries in a company this size would have paragraphs of data explaining the payout metrics met, sales targets exceeded, KPIs achieved. For Riley Shaw, there was a single sentence. Digitally signed by Lena Carrington, CFO. Comp for off-cycle strategic support. It was gibberish. It was a corporate word salad designed to say absolutely nothing while filling the required text box. Off-cycle strategic support could mean anything. It could mean she stayed late to fix a slide deck, or it could mean she was providing a service that had nothing to do with fintech and everything to do with the man who signed the checks. I needed a benchmark. I needed to know if I was crazy. I opened a new tab and searched for David Chen, the Chief Technology Officer. David had been with Wade since the garage days. He was the genius behind the actual code. David's profile loaded. I checked his bonus history. December 15th, annual performance bonus, $15,000, the CTO, the man who built the architecture of the entire platform, received $15,000. Riley Shaw, a mid-level analyst who had been at the company for 2 years, received $480,000. The discrepancy was so loud it was screaming. This wasn't bad management. This was embezzlement. This was Wade taking shareholder money, company profit, and funneling it into the pocket of a woman he was sleeping with. He was using the corporate payroll system as his own personal ATM to fund an affair. I could hear Wade's voice down the hall. He was shouting now. Something about server load and unacceptable latency. I had seconds, maybe a minute. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking, but my focus was laser sharp. I didn't just take a picture. I switched to document scan mode to ensure the text was crisp. I photographed the summary page with the $480,000 total. I photographed the list of transaction dates. I photographed the note from Lena regarding off-cycle strategic support. I photographed David's profile for comparison. Then, I did something I had never done before. I opened my email app. I didn't use our shared family email, and I didn't use my work email. I used an old secure account I had set up years ago for an anonymous design forum and never deactivated. I attached the photos. In the subject line, I typed 3 words. Don't forget this. I hit send. I watched the progress bar turn blue. Sent. I deleted the photos from my camera roll immediately. I deleted them from the recently deleted folder. I scrubbed the evidence from my phone just as the sound of Wade's footsteps echoed on the hardwood floor. I quickly closed the browser tab, returning the screen to the generic desktop background. But I left the laptop open, exactly as he had left it. I turned around and busied myself with the espresso machine, my back to him. My heart was pounding so hard I thought he would hear it over the hiss of the steam wand. Wade walked in, looking flushed and annoyed. He grabbed his laptop, checking the screen suspiciously. Seeing the desktop, he visibly relaxed. He snapped the lid shut. "Everything okay?" I asked. My voice sounded thin, like it was coming from someone else. "Fine," he said, rubbing his temples. "Just incompetence. I am surrounded by incompetence." I turned to face him, holding a mug of coffee I didn't want. "Wade," I said, keeping my tone casual, almost bored. "I was reading an article today about tech salaries. Do we give big bonuses to the younger staff, like the analysts?" Wade froze. His hand stopped halfway to his pocket. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing into slits. "Why would you ask that?" he asked. His voice dropped an octave. "I don't know." I shrugged. "Just curious. It seems like a competitive market. I wondered if we had to pay extra to keep people." The explosion was instantaneous. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Madison," he snapped. His face twisted with a sudden, defensive rage. "Compensation structures are complex. They are proprietary. You don't understand the industry, and you certainly don't understand how I run my business." He took a step toward me, aggressive and looming. "Stop reading stupid articles and stick to picking out curtains," he spat. "And don't ever touch my systems again. Do you hear me?" He stormed out of the kitchen, taking the laptop with him. I stood there, the heat of his anger washing over me. He hadn't just dismissed me, he had panicked. A man with nothing to hide explains. A man with a $480,000 secret attack. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Wade was asleep beside me, his breathing deep and even. He slept like a baby. He slept like a man who thought he was untouchable. I lay there and I pulled the threads together. The name Riley mumbled in his dream. The business trips to cities where she likely was. The Instagram story on the rooftop in Miami. The way Lena, the cold CFO, looked at me with pity and disdain. And the number, $480,000. It wasn't just money, it was the quantification of his betrayal. He had valued her silence, her company, and her body at nearly $500,000 of company funds. And he had valued me at 0. He hadn't even put me on the list. I turned my head and looked at him in the dark. He looked the same as he always did, but he wasn't my husband anymore. He was a target. I spoke silently to the ceiling, imagining a camera recording this moment for the future. If you have ever seen a number that made your stomach turn over, you know this feeling. You know the physical sensation of your reality rewriting itself in real time. It starts as nausea, but it settles as a cold, hard resolve. You also know that from the moment you see that number, you are not the same person anymore. You can't go back to being the wife who makes espresso and picks out curtains. I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I memorized the number, 480,000. It was the combination to a safe I was about to blow open. 3 weeks of suffocating silence passed between the afternoon I found the payroll data and the moment Wade finally called the meeting. He did not frame it as a divorce. He sent a calendar invite to my personal email with the subject line, "Administrative Update Regarding Estate Planning." It was scheduled for 7 in the evening at the headquarters. Neutral ground, or so he pretended. When I walked into that conference room on the 47th floor, it was not a discussion. It was an ambush. We were back where the story started. But now you know what I was carrying in my head as I sat down. I sat across from Wade and his lawyer, a man named Arthur who had a voice like grinding gravel. The projector was humming behind Wade, displaying the very payroll numbers I had secretly photographed, though Wade had seemingly forgotten they were there, Or perhaps his arrogance was so total that he did not think I would understand what I was looking at. Arthur did the talking. He opened a thick file folder and began to read. He sounded like he was reciting the terms and conditions of a software update, not the demolition of a marriage. He cited the prenuptial agreement I had signed 7 years ago. Back then, Harmon Vertex was worth less than $2 million. I had signed it on the hood of Wade's rusted sedan because I loved him and I wanted him to know I wasn't after his money. Now, Arthur was using that document to strangle me. According to the terms of the pre-existing agreement, Arthur droned, touching his glasses, you are entitled to a lump sum payout based on the valuation of the company at the time of signing. Adjusted for inflation, the company's current valuation is protected as separate property. Translation, Wade keeps the billions. I got the crumbs from a decade ago. Wade finally moved. He placed his hand on the thin envelope that sat on the table between us. He slid it forward. I want to be generous. Madison, Wade said. His voice was calm, almost kind. It was the voice of a man who believes he is a benevolent king. Technically, under the prenup, I owe you very little, but I appreciate the time we spent together. He nodded at the envelope. Open it. I opened it. I pulled out the check. $75,000. I stared at the number. $75,000. That was the price tag he had put on 7 years of my life. That was the value of the nights I stayed up designing his pitch decks. That was the value of the emotional labor I had poured into him when he was crying on the floor because a server crashed. And then, the comparison hit me like a physical slap. Riley Shaw, a woman he had known for less than 2 years, had received $480,000 in so-called work bonuses. He was paying his mistress nearly $500,000 to keep her happy, and he was offering his wife $75,000 to go away. There was a document attached to the check, a non-disclosure agreement. I scanned the first paragraph. It was draconian. It forbade me from discussing Wade, the company, our marriage, or the settlement on any platform, public or private. It explicitly mentioned social media, podcasts, and press interviews. Take it, Wade said softly. It is enough to get a nice apartment. Maybe take that trip to Italy you always wanted. The rage that had been simmering in my gut for 3 weeks finally boiled over. It was not a hot, screaming rage. It was cold. It was absolute. I looked up from the check and locked eyes with him. Who is Riley Shaw? The room went dead silent. The hum of the air conditioning seemed to vanish. Wade froze. His pupils dilated. For a split second, the mask of the billionaire CEO slipped, and I saw the panicked boy underneath. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. I pointed at the screen behind him, where the payroll dashboard was still faintly visible. You are offering me $75,000 to leave quietly, I said, my voice steady. Yet you authorized $480,000 in work bonuses for a strategy analyst named Riley Shaw. Why is her silence worth 6 times more than mine? Wade blinked rapidly. He looked at Arthur, then back at me. He cleared his throat. That is an HR matter, he stammered. His voice was tight. Executive discretion. Lena handles those allocations. It is a retention strategy for top talent. You do not know what you are talking about. You are lying. I said. I saw the wire transfers. I saw the dates. You are paying her with shareholder money. And now you are trying to pay me off with pocket change. Arthur, the lawyer, leaned forward. The boredom was gone from his face, replaced by a sharp, predatory alertness. Mrs. Harmon, he said, his voice dropping to a growl. I would advise you to be very careful. If you choose not to sign this agreement, if you choose to make defamatory accusations based on confidential company data you accessed without authorization, we will not just enforce the prenup, we will counter-sue. You will leave this marriage with absolutely nothing. No check, no apartment, zero. He let the word zero hang in the air. Wade regained his composure. He leaned back, crossing his arms. Sign the paper. Madison, he said coldly, do not make this ugly. You cannot win against my legal team. Just take the money and go. I looked at the check one last time. $75,000. I did not sign. I put the papers back into the envelope. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but my spine felt like steel. I will not sign this. I said, "Then you get nothing." Wade said, "We will see," I replied. I turned and walked out. I felt their eyes boring into my back. I walked out of the glass room, down the long corridor lined with modern art I had helped select. I took the elevator down 47 floors. When I stepped into the lobby, I paused. The floor was polished marble, cold and expansive. In the center of the wall behind the reception desk was the massive Harman Vertex logo, the geometric V shape interlocking with the H. I had sketched that logo on a napkin in a diner in Denver. I had vectorized it on my laptop while Wade slept on the floor next to me. It was my design. It was my vision. And now it was the seal of the empire that was trying to crush me. I walked out the revolving doors into the humid Austin night. I felt like a stranger in my own life. I was holding an envelope that contained the wreckage of my marriage, and I had nowhere to go. I sat in my car and called my sister, Brooke. Brooke was a nurse living in San Diego. She was practical, grounded, the person I always called when the world felt like it was spinning. I told her everything. I told her about the check. I told her about Riley. I told her about the threat. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I expected outrage. I expected her to tell me to burn the place down. Instead, Brooke sighed. "Maddie," she said softly, "look, I know it hurts. I know he's a jerk, but $75,000 is a lot of money." I stared at the dashboard of my car. "What are you saying?" I asked. "I am saying you have to be realistic." Brooke said, "Wade is powerful. He paid for Mom's surgery last year without blinking. He has been good to the family. If you fight him, he will destroy you. Maybe you should just take the deal. Start over. Why ruin your life over pride?" I hung up. I sat there in the dark, feeling a new kind of loneliness. It wasn't just Wade. It was the world. Even my own sister looked at the money and decided that my dignity was a fair price to pay for stability. Society has conditioned us to think that when a rich man hands you an envelope, you should say thank you and shut up. They think $75,000 is a gift, not a muzzle. I drove home to the house that wasn't mine anymore. I walked into the kitchen where I had found the laptop. I sat down at the island and poured myself a glass of water. I placed the envelope on the table. I took the papers out again. I wasn't looking at the money this time. I was looking at the structure of the lie. I turned the pages of the non-disclosure agreement. I read the legal jargon, the clauses about non-disparagement, the threats of financial ruin, and then I saw it. It was a small detail, a tiny clerical error born of arrogance and haste. On the last page, under the execution block, there was a section for the delivery of notices. It listed the contact information for Wade's legal representation, but the return address for the agreement itself, the digital footprint of the document's origin, was listed in the footer. Document drafted by Legal Harman Vertex. Com. I blinked. I pulled the paper closer. This wasn't a personal lawyer. This wasn't a private family attorney paid for out of Wade's own pocket. This document, this personal divorce settlement, this agreement designed to silence his wife about his affair, had been drafted by the in-house corporate legal team of Harman Vertex. He had used company resources, company lawyers, and company time to handle his private mess, just like he had used company payroll to pay his mistress. It was a pattern. He didn't see a distinction between the company's money and his own. He didn't see a distinction between the company's lawyers and his personal fixers. He thought he owned it all, and that was a violation of fiduciary duty. That was misappropriation of assets. That was fraud. I felt a smile touch my lips. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a person who had just found the loose thread in a very expensive sweater. Brooke was wrong. Wade wasn't untouchable. He was sloppy. He was so used to getting his way that he had stopped covering his tracks. He thought the envelope was the end of the story. He thought he had closed the book on Madison Lewis. I looked directly into the reflection of the darkened window, imagining an audience watching me. He thinks this is the conclusion. He thinks I'm going to cry myself to sleep and sign his paper in the morning. But he is wrong. This isn't the end. This is the opening act. I picked up the pen. I didn't sign the line. Instead, I circled the email address, legalharmonvertex.com. I decided right then, if he was going to treat me like a liability, I was going to become a liability. If he was going to treat me cheap, I was going to stop being polite. I wasn't going to sign. I was going to burn the whole thing down, and I was going to use his own envelope to light the match. The next morning, I did not go to the bank to deposit the check. I went to a glass building on the other side of town to meet a woman named Ava Monroe. I had found Ava through a whisper network of women in Austin who had divorced powerful men. Her reputation was specific. She did not just handle separations, she handled wars. She was known for representing whistleblowers and spouses who had been steamrolled by corporate legal teams. When I walked into her office, there was no soft music or calming art. There were floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with case law and a view of the skyline that looked like a sniper's vantage point. Ava was 60, with silver hair cut short and eyes that looked like they had seen every lie a man could tell. She sat behind a desk that was completely clear except for a notepad. I placed the envelope on the desk. I laid out the check for $75,000. I laid out the non-disclosure agreement. And I laid out the printouts of the payroll data showing the $480,000 sent to Riley Shaw. Ava put on her glasses. She read in silence for 10 minutes. The only sound in the room was the turning of pages. Finally, she looked up. She tapped a manicured fingernail on the check. "He called this a settlement?" she asked. Her voice was dry, like paper. "Yes," I said. Ava laughed. It was a sharp, barking sound. "Honey, this is not a settlement. This is a tip. This is what a billionaire leaves on the nightstand when he thinks the service was mediocre." She pushed the check away with disdain and picked up the NDA. Her expression shifted from amusement to focus. She pulled a red pen from her pocket and circled the footer I had noticed the night before. "This is your weapon," Ava said, tapping the circle. "He used the company legal department to draft a personal agreement. He used the company email server to send it." "Why does that matter so much?" I asked. "Because," Ava said, leaning forward, "a prenup protects his personal assets from you. It says you cannot touch the money he made. But a prenup does not protect a CEO from the consequences of corporate malfeasance. By using company resources to silence his wife about a matter that involves company funds being paid to a mistress, he has bridged the gap. This is no longer just a messy divorce. This is a governance issue. This is misappropriation of shareholder funds." She looked at the payroll data again. $480,000, she muttered. "That is a lot of money for a strategy analyst." She reached for her phone. "I'm going to bring in a specialist," she said. "We need to dig. If there is one rat in the kitchen, there is usually a nest in the walls." An hour later, a man named Noah Riker walked in. Noah looked like the opposite of Wade. He was wearing a rumpled jacket. He hadn't shaved in 2 days. And he carried a leather satchel that looked like it had survived a war zone. Ava introduced him as a former investigator for the Securities and Exchange Commission, who now worked privately to uncover fraud in startups and hedge funds. Noah didn't waste time with pleasantries. He sat down, took the payroll screenshots, and studied them for a long time. He hummed to himself, a low, dissonant sound. "This is sloppy," Noah said, pointing to the bonus column. $480,000 in 18 months. The frequency is too regular. 40,000, 40,000, 40,000. This isn't performance-based. Performance bonuses vary. They are 13,000 one month, 50,000 the next. This is a subscription service." He looked at me. "You said her name is Riley Shaw?" He asked. "Yes," I said. Noah typed the name into his laptop. His fingers flew across the keyboard. "Mid-level analyst," he said, reading off the screen. "Okay, here's the thing. Madison, a CEO sleeping with an employee is a scandal. Sure, but paying her $500,000 from the company account, that is embezzlement. And usually, when they are this bold with the numbers, it means they have built a structure to hide it. It means Riley isn't an isolated incident. She is just the most expensive one. We spent the next 3 hours mapping out a battle plan. It felt less like legal prep and more like plotting a heist. We divided the strategy into 3 branches. First, Noah would mine the payroll data. I could not access the system again. Wade had likely locked me out or changed the passwords, but I had enough information in the screenshots for Noah to start looking for patterns from the outside. He knew how to track the movement of money through shell companies and vendor payments. Second, we needed to map the relationship triangle between Wade, Riley, and Lena. If Lena, the CFO, was signing off on these bonuses, she was complicit. We needed to know why. Was she being paid off too, or was she simply loyal to the hand that fed her third, and most dangerous? We needed to find other voices. We needed to set up a secure line of communication for potential victims or witnesses who were too scared to speak up. For the next 2 weeks, I lived a double life, by day. I went to my office at Northline Habitat Studio. I picked out fabric swatches for a boutique hotel. I argued with contractors about lighting fixtures. I pretended that my life was not imploding. I answered emails with a smile. I drank coffee with my colleagues and nodded when they talked about their weekend plans. But by night, I was an operative. I went home to the empty house Wade was staying at a hotel. Claiming he needed space, and I dug through everything I had left. I went through 7 years of digital archives. I found old hard drives. I found backup clouds. I sent Noah everything. Every flight confirmation Wade had ever forwarded me. Every hotel receipt. Every photo from every gala where Lena or Riley might have been in the background. It was exhausting work. It was also heartbreaking. I was essentially performing an autopsy on my own marriage, cutting open the memories to find the cancer inside. One evening, Noah called me. His voice was grim. I found something on Riley. He said, "What?" I asked, gripping the phone. "She has done this before," Noah said. "I ran a background check on her employment history 3 years ago. She worked for a logistics tech company in Seattle. She was there for 9 months. She left suddenly after what was described internally as a personnel dispute. 2 weeks after she left, she bought a condo in cash. A condo in cash." I repeated, "Pattern match." Noah said, "She targets high-level executives. She gets into a position of proximity, then she gets paid to leave, or stay." Wade isn't just having an affair. Madison, he is being harvested, but he is using your money, shareholder money, to pay the bill. But that wasn't the worst part. Noah had kept digging into the payroll structures of Harmon Vertex. Using contacts he still had in the auditing world, he found 3 other anomalies, 3 other female employees, all under the age of 25, all in vague administrative or assistant roles, all receiving discretionary bonuses labeled as retention incentives, $5,000 here, $10,000 there, not the massive sums Riley was getting, but enough to buy a car, enough to pay off student loans, enough to buy loyalty. This is a hush money system. Noah told me he treats the company treasury like a harem fund. He pays them to keep them happy, or quiet, or both. I felt sick. The house felt contaminated. I realized that the luxury I had been living in, the dinners we had eaten, the clothes Wade wore, it was all sustained by a rot that went down to the core. Then came the breakthrough. We had set up an encrypted email address, listeningvertextruth.com, and leaked it on a few anonymous tech forums, framing it as a safe space for whistleblower complaints about financial mismanagement. We didn't mention sexual misconduct. We kept it strictly about money. 3 days later, we got a hit. The email was short. The subject line was simply, "I know about the bonuses." The sender identified herself as Erin Blake. She wrote that she was the ex-wife of a former Harmon Vertex sales director. She said her husband had been pushed out of the company 2 years ago because he refused to participate in what he called the executive culture. She wrote, "I saw your post about financial mismanagement. You have no idea how deep it goes. My husband tried to report it. They crushed him." They made us sign an agreement, but I kept a copy of the original draft before the lawyers scrubbed it. "I know who you are. Madison. I read an article about your community design projects years ago. You helped build a shelter for women in East Austin. I know you are a good person. If you are looking for the truth, I will talk to you. I stared at the screen. Aaron Blake, a stranger who knew my name, not because I was a billionaire's wife, but because of the work I had done when I was just Madison. I forwarded the email to Ava and Noah. We have an opening. I typed. I sat back in my chair. The house was dark. The silence was still there, but it felt different now. It wasn't the silence of a victim waiting for the next blow. It was the silence of a hunter waiting for the trap to snap. I looked at the camera of my mind, addressing the women who might be listening to this story in the future. There is a moment when you realize that the silence they force on you is not a wall. It is a map. When they hand you an NDA, they are handing you a list of exactly where they are vulnerable. They are telling you exactly what they are afraid of. Wade thought the envelope was a lock. He didn't realize he had handed me the key to the city, and I am very, very good at reading maps. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the Austin skyline, where the lights of the Harmon Vertex Tower glowed in the distance. It looked like a fortress, but I knew better. I knew it was a house of cards, and I was holding the wind. Tomorrow, I will call Aaron Blake. Tomorrow, the investigation will turn from data into testimony. Wade had his millions. He had his lawyers. He had his CFO who could hide money in the dark. But I had something he had forgotten to account for. I had the truth, and I had nothing left to lose. I sat at my dining table with my laptop propped up on a stack of architecture magazines, watching the face of a stranger pixelate slightly on the screen. Aaron Blake looked nothing like the women Wade usually surrounded himself with. She was not wearing designer silk or heavy makeup. She was sitting in a dimly lit living room in Portland, wearing a gray sweatshirt, holding a mug of tea with both hands, as if she were trying to warm herself from the inside out. Erin was the ex-wife of a former regional sales director at Harmon Vertex. She had reached out to me through our encrypted channel, and now, hearing her voice, I realized I was listening to a ghost from my husband's past. He never wanted to go to the dinners, Erin said, her voice steady but low. Wade had this inner circle. They called it the Apex Group. If you were invited, you were expected to stay late. You were expected to drink. You were expected to ignore the young women who were hired for roles that did not seem to exist on the org chart. My husband, Mark, was old school. He just wanted to sell software and come home to his kids. When he refused the third invitation to a private yacht party in Miami, the freeze-out started. I listened, taking notes in a black sketchbook. The freeze-out. It sounded familiar. They made his life hell. Aaron continued. Sudden territory changes, impossible quotas, and then the accusations of performance failure. They fired him 2 years ago to avoid a lawsuit for wrongful termination. They offered us a settlement. It was small, just enough to cover our mortgage for 6 months while he looked for a new job. But we had to sign the paper. Aaron held up a document to the camera. I kept a copy. She said, Mark told me to burn it. But I didn't. I had a bad feeling. Can you scan that to me? I asked. Right now. The email arrived 3 minutes later. I opened the attachment and placed it side by side on my screen with the non-disclosure agreement Wade had handed me in the envelope. My breath hitched. They were identical. I do not mean they were similar legally. I mean they were visually identical. The font was the same Garamond size 11. The spacing between the paragraphs was the same. The layout of the signature block was the same. But the smoking gun was on page 4. In my agreement, under the clause regarding liquidated damages, there was a typo. The word liability was misspelled as liability, missing the third I. I zoomed in on Aaron's agreement from 2 years ago. Page 4, clause 7, liability, the same missing I. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. This was not a document drafted for my specific situation. This was a template. Wade and his team had a standard operating procedure for silencing people. They didn't even bother to spell check it anymore because they had used it so many times without challenge. Noah Riker, my investigator, was sitting across the table from me. I turned the laptop toward him. Look at this, I said. Noah leaned in. adjusting his glasses. He whistled low and long. "That is efficient," he said grimly. "That is industrial-scale silence." Noah pulled the metadata from the digital file Aaron had sent. He ran a comparison with the file I had received. "Madison. Look here," Noah said, pointing to a string of code on his screen. "The author tag on both documents is the same. Vertex Legal Admin 04. And look at the timestamps. Your NDA wasn't created last week. It was modified from a master file that has been on their server for 5 years. This proved Ava's theory. Wade wasn't just a bad husband. He was a CEO using corporate assets, legal templates, administrative staff, and company servers to manage his personal collateral damage. Over the next 48 hours, the floodgates opened. Through the secure channel, 2 more women came forward. Monica Reyes, the wife of a former developer, told me about the advancement opportunities that turned into private dinners where Wade would discuss everything except business. When her husband confronted Wade, he was transferred to a dead-end project in a satellite office until he quit. They signed the paper. Hannah Cole, whose husband had been a marketing lead, told me about the mistake. Her husband had stumbled upon a folder of expenses labeled client retention that were actually payments for luxury rentals in the Caribbean used by Wade and his friends. He was let go the next week for security violations. They signed the paper. The pattern was absolute. Wade and his inner circle, led by Lena Carrington, ran Harmon Vertex like a feudal kingdom. Anyone who questioned morality was crushed. Anyone who played along was rewarded. And that brought me back to Riley Shaw. I had been thinking of Riley as just the other woman, the mistress. But as I looked at the wall of evidence, Noah and I were building the timeline of payments. The hush money templates, the pattern of silence. I realized I was wrong. Riley wasn't just a mistress. She was the ultimate product of this system. She was a success story. She was the one who didn't refuse the invitation. She was the one who played the game. And $480,000 was not just a gift, it was her salary for being the perfect accomplice. She provided Wade with what he wanted physically, but she also provided him with the narrative he needed: the young, female talent. He was mentoring. She was a human shield paid for with shareholder dividends. Then came the breakthrough that changed everything. Noah had been working his sources inside the company IT department, old friends who were tired of Wade's tyranny. On Thursday night, he got a hit. He pulled up a chain of archived emails between Wade and Lena. They were dated 18 months ago, right when the payments to Riley began. The subject line was adjustment. Wade wrote, "We need to take care of R. She is worried about the exposure. Make sure she is comfortable." Lena replied, "I can route it through the discretionary bonus pool. It will blend in with the quarterly payouts if we keep it under $50,000 per tranche." Wade wrote back, "Do it. Tag those as work bonuses. If HR asks, call it retention. She knows the drill. She knows the drill." I stared at the screen. There it was, in black and white. Tag those as work bonuses. It was a direct instruction to falsify financial records. It was a conspiracy between the CEO and the CFO to disguise hush money as operational expenses. Noah sat back, crossing his arms. "That is it," he said. "That is the nail in the coffin. That is fraud. That is a conspiracy. That is 5 to 10 years in federal prison if the Securities and Exchange Commission has a good day." Ava, my lawyer, wasted no time. She began drafting a formal whistleblower complaint. She framed it perfectly. We did not mention the affair in the legal filing. We focused entirely on the numbers, the misuse of funds, the falsification of records, the lack of board oversight. We were describing a rotting financial structure, not a broken marriage. But Wade was not asleep. On Friday afternoon, my phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. It was a text from Wade. We hadn't spoken since I walked out of the conference room. The message read, "I know you are talking to Monroe Associates. Think very carefully about your next move. Madison, you do not want to go to war with me. I can make sure you never work in this industry again." My stomach dropped. He knew. He had someone watching me, or he had sources in the legal community. For a moment, the old fear returned. I remembered his power. I remembered the way he could destroy people with a phone call, but then I looked at the stack of affidavits on my table. I looked at Aaron's statement. I looked at the email where he ordered Lena to cook the books. He wasn't texting me because he was strong. He was texting me because he was terrified. A man who is secure doesn't threaten his wife via text message. A man who knows the walls are closing in does. I didn't reply. Instead, I made a decision. I walked into my living room. I set up my camera on a tripod. I checked the lighting. I was not wearing a power suit. I was wearing a simple white shirt. I looked tired, but I looked clear-eyed. I hit a record. I did not use names. I did not say Wade Harmon or Harmon Vertex. I kept it vague enough to avoid an immediate libel suit, but specific enough that anyone in the industry would know exactly who I was talking about. I looked into the lens. I said, I want to talk about the price of silence. I want to talk about what happens when a billion-dollar company decides that the truth is too expensive to manage, so they buy it instead. I was handed an envelope with $75,000 in it to forget what I saw, but what I saw was worth $480,000 to someone else. If you have ever been asked to sign your name to a lie, this story is for you. I spoke for 3 minutes. I talked about the pattern. I talked about the work bonuses that were really hush money. I talked about the template agreements used to crush families. I posted the video to my personal storytelling channel. I titled it, The Envelope on the 47th Floor. Within 2 hours, it had 50,000 views. By the next morning, it had 1 million. The comments section was a wildfire. People were guessing the company. Former employees were surfacing in the threads, dropping hints. The hashtag, The Envelope, began to trend. Wade's threat had backfired. He wanted to scare me into silence, but he had only pushed me to scream. Saturday morning, Noah burst into my kitchen without knocking. He looked manic, holding a tablet. Madison, he said, look at the calendar. I looked. It was the corporate calendar for Harmon Vertex. Next Tuesday, Noah said, pointing to a date. Annual General Meeting of Shareholders. It is an open floor session this year because the major institutional investors are demanding a review of the fiscal year. I read the agenda items. Item number 4, Executive Compensation and Financial Transparency, presented by Wade Harmon, CEO, and Lena Carrington, CFO. I looked at Noah. A slow realization spread through me. They have to stand on a stage. I said, in front of everyone. Noah nodded. In front of the pension funds, in front of the banks, in front of the press. They have to present the books, the same books they falsified. It was the perfect storm. Wade had built a glass castle, and he had invited the whole world to come watch him throw stones. I felt the weight of the envelope in my mind. It wasn't a burden anymore. It was a ticket. I am going to that meeting. I said. Noah smiled. A shark-like grin. You are a shareholder, he said. You have every right to be there. I looked at the comments rolling in on my video. I looked at the evidence on the table. Wade had told me I would be just a bitter woman on the internet. He was about to find out that a bitter woman with the truth is the most dangerous thing on earth. Tuesday, I said, let's go say hello. The war began on a Thursday morning with the click of a mouse. Ava Monroe did not send the files from her office network. We drove to a crowded internet cafe 3 towns over, wearing sunglasses and baseball caps like characters in a bad spy movie, to upload the dossier. The package was anonymous. It contained the payroll screenshots showing the $480,000 paid to Riley Shaw. It contained the metadata analysis of the non-disclosure agreements. It contained the comparison of the template hush money contracts signed by Aaron, Monica, and Hannah. We sent it to 2 destinations. The first was the Securities and Exchange Commission, specifically the Whistleblower Division. The second was the Internal Ethics and Governance Committee of Harmon Vertex. Ava called it the pincer movement, one claw attacks from the outside with the threat of federal prison, the other claw attacks from the inside with the threat of corporate liability. We sat back and waited for the scream. It didn't take long. 24 hours later, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered it, expecting Wade's lawyer. Arthur. to be yelling on the other end. Instead, it was a voice smooth enough to slide across glass. It was Simon Vance, one of the longest-serving members of the Harmon Vertex Board of Directors. I had met him once at a Christmas party where he had complimented my dress and ignored my name. "Madison," Simon said, "I think we should have tea." We met in the private back room of a hotel restaurant downtown. Simon did not look like a man facing a crisis. He looked like a man managing a portfolio. He ordered Earl Grey and got straight to the point. "We received an interesting anonymous tip yesterday," Simon said, stirring his tea. "Very detailed, very damaging. If this were to become public, the stock price would likely lose 30% of its value overnight. That represents billions of dollars in shareholder equity." He looked at me over the rim of his cup. "We know it was you, Madison." I didn't blink. I took a sip of my water. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Simon?" Simon smiled. A tired, grandfatherly expression. "Let's stop playing. Wade is an idiot. He let his ego get in the way of business. He should never have offered you $75,000. It was insulting. I told him that." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. He slid it across the table. "This is a new proposal. Madison, it is coming directly from the board's discretionary fund, not Wade's personal accounts. We want to correct the mistake." I opened the folder. The number jumped out at me. $5 million. And underneath that title transfer for the Westlake property, it was a house I had always loved. A sprawling estate on the lake. $5 million in the house. All I had to do was sign a new agreement. This one was even stricter. It banned me from speaking to the press, the SEC, or any government agency. It required me to retract any anonymous statements I might have made. It required me to vanish. "This is a one-time offer," Simon said softly. "It expires in 48 hours. If you decline, we will bury you in litigation until you are 50 years old. We will paint you as a mentally unstable ex-wife trying to extort a visionary. We have the resources to do it. Take the win. Madison, walk away rich." I left the meeting with the folder in my bag. I drove to Ava's office in a daze. That night was the hardest night of my life. I sat on Ava's leather sofa, staring at the number $5 million. $5 million. It was freedom. It was safe. It was enough to start my own design firm 10 times over. It was enough to ensure I never had to worry about a bill again. All I had to do was throw Riley, Aaron, Monica, and Hannah under the bus. All I had to do was let Wade win. I started to cry. I am not talking about a few tears. I am talking about the kind of ugly, heaving sobs that come when your soul is being torn in half. "I can't do this." "Ava," I said, my voice shaking. "I am tired. They are too big. Maybe I should just take it. Maybe Brooke was right. Why am I fighting for people who didn't fight for me?" Ava poured me a glass of scotch. She didn't hug me. She didn't tell me it would be okay. She sat on the edge of her desk and looked at me with hard, dark eyes. "You can take it," Ava said. "Nobody would blame you. It is life-changing money. You go to Europe, you buy nice shoes, you forget the name Riley Shaw." She took a sip of her drink. "But you have to ask yourself one question. Madison, who do you want to be when you look in the mirror next year? Do you want to be the woman who got bought? Or do you want to be the woman who told the truth?" I looked at the folder. I thought about Erin Blake sitting in her dim living room. I thought about the work bonus lie. If I signed, I became part of the payroll. I became just another Riley Shaw, only more expensive. I wiped my face. I stood up. I picked up the folder and dropped it into the shredder by Ava's desk. The machine roared to life, eating the $5 million offer in 10 seconds. "I want to be the woman who burns them down," I said. Ava smiled. It was the first time I had seen her genuinely smile. "Good," she said. "Then let's call Caleb." Caleb Ford was not what I expected. He was an investigative journalist for a major financial publication, a man who had won awards for exposing corruption in Silicon Valley. We met him in a diner off the highway, far from the prying eyes of downtown. He was young, maybe 30, with dark circles under his eyes and a skepticism that felt like armor. He listened to my story without taking a single note. When I finished, he leaned back. "It is a great story," Caleb said. "But I can't print a story. I need proof. The emails are good. The payroll screenshots are strong. But Harmon Vertex will say they are forged. They will say you are a bitter ex-wife. I need corroboration." We gave him everything. We gave him the contact info for Aaron, Monica, and Hannah. We gave him the metadata reports. Caleb spent the next 4 days working like a machine. He didn't just take our word for it. He flew to Portland to meet Aaron. He cross-referenced the flight logs. He found a source inside the Harmon Vertex HR department, a junior manager terrified of losing her job who confirmed off the record that the special bonus pool existed and was controlled exclusively by Lena. While Caleb was building the bomb, Wade and Lena were trying to reinforce the castle. They announced an internal audit. They hired a prestigious law firm to conduct an independent investigation into the anonymous allegations. It was a theater. We knew it, and they knew it. The goal wasn't to find the truth. The goal was to find the leak. They were hunting for whoever had given me the payroll data. Noah, monitoring the situation from his end, called us with urgent news on Sunday. "They are moving the money." Noah said, "What do you mean?" I asked. "I am tracking the discretionary accounts." Noah explained. "The accounts used to pay Riley and the others. They are being drained. Lena is moving the funds to a subsidiary in the Cayman Islands under the guise of intellectual property licensing fees. They are cleaning the books. Madison, they are trying to erase the trail before the shareholder meeting." This was it. Consciousness of guilt. Innocent people don't move millions of dollars to the Caymans 3 days before a shareholder meeting. We met for a final war council in Ava's office on Monday night. The shareholder meeting was Tuesday morning. The deadline was razor thin. Caleb was on speakerphone. I have the story. Caleb said, "My editor has greenlit it. It is 4,000 words. It details the payments, the NDAs, the pattern of sexual misconduct, and the financial fraud. We have quotes from 3 victims and the internal source. When does it run?" Ava asked. "We are scheduled to publish at 8 in the morning Eastern Time." Caleb said, "That is 1 hour before the market opens and 2 hours before the meeting starts. It will dominate the news cycle." There was a pause. "But I need one last thing." Caleb said, "I need a visual, something visceral, something that cuts through the numbers. The payroll spreadsheet is dry. The emails are text. I need an image that people will remember. The torch that lights the whole pile on fire." I looked down at my hands. I knew exactly what he needed. I reached into my bag and pulled out the object I had carried with me since that night on the 47th floor. The envelope, the cream-colored envelope with Wade's handwriting on the sticky note. "Don't make this hard. You will be fine." And inside, the check for $75,000 and the unsigned NDA drafted by the company lawyers. "I can give you the envelope." I said to the phone, "Can you photograph it?" Caleb asked. "High resolution. I want the handwriting, the check, and the corporate logo on the NDA all in one frame." I set the envelope on Ava's mahogany desk. I arranged the contents. The check looked so small now. The note looked so patronizing. I took the photo. I hit send. "Got it," Caleb said. "This is perfect. It is the smoking gun. It connects the personal betrayal to the corporate resource misuse in one single image." I hung up the phone. The room was quiet. Ava looked at me. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" she asked. I thought about the $5 million I had shredded. I thought about the fear in Aaron's voice. I thought about Wade standing on that stage, thinking he was safe. "I am ready," I said. Noah checked his watch. "The money transfer to the Caymans just cleared." He said, "They think they are safe. They think they have wiped the fingerprints off the weapon." I stood up and walked to the window. The city lights were blurring in the heat. They forgot one thing. I said, "What is that?" Noah asked. I turned back to them. They forgot that I was the one who designed the room they are hiding in. The article would drop in 12 hours. The meeting would start at 14. Wade was currently preparing his slide deck about transparency and growth. He had no idea that the woman he had tried to silence with $75,000 was about to walk into his meeting with a journalist, a lawyer, and the truth. The chess game was over. I wasn't playing defense anymore. I was coming for the king. The ballroom of the W Hotel in Austin was designed to impress. It had 30-foot ceilings, crystal chandeliers that looked like frozen waterfalls, and enough seating for 500 people. Today, every single seat was filled. The air smelled of expensive coffee and nervous anticipation. I walked in through the side doors. I was not wearing the designer dresses Wade liked me in. I was wearing a charcoal gray suit I had bought at a department store the day before. I wore flat shoes. I pulled my hair back into a tight knot. I did not look like the wife of a billionaire. I looked like a shareholder who had questions. And I was a shareholder. Years ago, during the Series A round, Wade had gifted me 2% of the company stock. He had called it a romantic gesture, a symbol that we were partners. He had forgotten about those shares. He had forgotten that 2% gave me a badge, a seat, and a microphone. I found a seat in the middle of the room, 3 rows behind the institutional investors, the men from the pension funds and the hedge funds who actually controlled the fate of the company. On the stage, the lighting was dramatic. A massive screen displayed the Harman Vertex logo, my design pulsing in a soft, reassuring blue. Wade and Lena sat in high-backed leather chairs, looking like royalty. Wade was wearing his lucky navy suit. Lena was wearing white, a calculated choice to suggest innocence and transparency. The meeting began with the usual fanfare. Wade gave a speech about vision, about disruption, about the future of finance. He was charming. He was magnetic. He smiled at the crowd. And for a moment, I remembered why I had fallen in love with him. He could sell water to a drowning man. Then Lena took the podium. She clicked through slides filled with graphs and growth curves. She spoke about fiscal discipline. She spoke about the efficiency of their capital allocation. And then, slide 14 appeared. It was the breakdown of personnel expenses. I squinted at the screen. I knew these numbers. I had memorized them. But something was different. The line item for discretionary executive bonuses was gone. In its place was a new category, long-term strategic equity grants. The number attached to it was exactly $480,000. I felt a cold smile touch my lips. They had cleaned the books. They had taken the cash payments sent to Riley Shaw and recategorized them as stock options or future grants to hide the paper trail. It was a rushed, sloppy fix designed to survive a 90-minute meeting. Lena finished her presentation. The room applauded politely. Wade stepped back to the microphone. "We will now open the floor for a brief Q&A session," Wade said, checking his watch. "We have about 15 minutes before the breakout sessions." This was the moment. The planted questions would come first. A man in the front row raised his hand and asked about AI integration. Wade answered smoothly. A woman asked about international expansion. Wade made a joke about frequent flyer miles. I waited. I watched the rhythm. And then, as Wade was finishing an answer, I stood up. I did not raise my hand. I just stood up. I walked to the microphone stand in the center aisle. The usher looked at me, confused, but saw my shareholder badge and stepped aside. Wade saw me. His smile didn't just fade. It evaporated. His face went pale, then flushed a deep, angry red. He gripped the podium so hard his knuckles turned white. I leaned into the microphone. My voice echoed through the massive sound system, crisp and clear. "Mr. CEO," I said. The room went deadly silent. Heads turned. 500 people looked at me. I continued. "My name is Madison Lewis Harman. I am a founding shareholder of this company, and I am the wife of the CEO." A ripple of murmurs went through the room. Wade forced a laugh. It sounded like glass breaking. "Madison," Wade said, his voice tight. "This is a shareholder meeting, not a family therapy session. If you have personal issues, we can discuss them at home." I ignored him. I looked directly at the board of directors seated in the front row. "I have a question regarding the financial transparency report we just saw." I said, specifically slide 14. "In the last fiscal year, this company authorized $480,000 in cash payments to a mid-level strategy analyst named Riley Shaw. These payments were originally tagged as work bonuses per the CEO's instruction. On the slide we just saw, They have been reclassified as equity grants. My question is simple. What specific strategic services did Ms. Shaw provide that were worth nearly $500,000 of shareholder money, and why was the CFO instructed to disguise them? The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens before a car crash. Wade leaned into his mic. He was sweating now. "This is absurd," Wade said, his voice shaking slightly. "You are confused. You are going through a difficult personal time, and you are lashing out. Security, please escort Mrs. Harmon out so we can continue." He played the card I knew he would play. The crazy wife, the emotional woman. I did not move. I reached into my large tote bag. "I am not confused. Wade," I said, "and I am not leaving, because I have the receipts." I pulled out the envelope, the cream-colored envelope he had slid across the table on the 47th floor. I held it up high. The stage lights caught the paper. "This is the severance package the CEO offered me to keep quiet about his misuse of company funds," I said to the room. "Inside is a non-disclosure agreement." I opened the envelope and pulled out the document. It was drafted by the Harmon Vertex legal department. I said, pointing to the header, "It was sent from the corporate email server. The CEO used company lawyers and company resources to draft a private settlement to silence a witness to financial fraud." I looked at the board members. Is it standard policy for the legal department to handle the CEO's divorce? Or is that also a strategic equity grant? Wade was shouting now. "Cut the mic," Wade yelled. "Cut her mic." But the sound engineer, stunned or perhaps enjoying the show, did not cut the mic. And then, the sound happened. It started in the front row. A cell phone vibrated against a wooden table, then another, then a chime, then a ping. Within 10 seconds, the sound of 500 phones receiving a notification at the exact same time filled the room like a swarm of digital locusts. Caleb Ford had hit publish. I saw a man in the second row, a representative from a major teacher's pension fund, look at his phone. His eyes went wide. He looked up at Wade, then back at his phone. He leaned over to the woman next to him and showed her the screen. The article title was bold and unforgiving, "The Billionaire's Buyout: How Harmon Vertex Used Shareholder Cash to Silence Women." I watched the wave of realization crash over the room. People were not looking at me anymore. They were reading. They were scrolling. I saw heads shaking. I saw frowns. Wade looked at his own phone, which was sitting on the podium. He saw the notification. He looked up, and for the first time in his life, he looked small. The representative from the pension fund stood up. He was a large man with a booming voice. He didn't need a microphone. "Mr. Harmon," he shouted, "is this true? Did you authorize payments to employees in exchange for personal silence?" Wade stammered. "It is a hit piece," Wade yelled. "It is out of context." "It is a misunderstanding," then. The final blow landed. From the back of the room, a side door opened. Ava Monroe walked in, and walking next to her, looking terrified, but determined, was Riley Shaw. Ava guided Riley to the aisle mic that I had just vacated. The room gasped. Everyone knew who she was now. Her name was in the article everyone was reading. Riley gripped the stand. She looked at Wade. She looked at Lena. "It wasn't a bonus," Riley said. Her voice was small, trembling, but it carried. Wade pointed a shaking finger at her. "Riley, don't say anything. You signed an agreement. That was the mistake." By shouting about the agreement, he admitted it existed. Riley took a breath. "Mr. Harmon told me that if I wanted to keep my job, I had to be available." She said, "Not for work, for him." When I tried to leave, Lena came to me. She told me the company valued my discretion. She made me sign the paper. She told me the $40,000 a month was to make sure I never told anyone about the trips or the hotel rooms. She looked at the crowd. I didn't do any strategy work. I was paid to be his secret. Wade snapped. The pressure, the article, the envelope, the girl, it was too much. The facade of the cool tech genius shattered. It was voluntary. Wade screamed into the microphone, his voice cracking. It was a relationship. We were all consenting adults. She took the money. She was happy to take the money. It was a mutual arrangement. Everyone benefited. The room recoiled. He had just admitted it. He had admitted paying her. He had admitted the relationship. He had admitted the transaction. Lena put her head in her hands. She knew it was over. The chairman of the board, a silver-haired man named Thomas, who had been sitting quietly in the front row, stood up. He walked up the stairs to the stage. He walked over to the podium. He reached out and physically turned off Wade's microphone. He leaned into his own mic. "This meeting is adjourned," Thomas said, his voice icy. "The board will convene in an emergency executive session immediately. Mr. Harmon, Ms. Carrington, you are relieved of your duties pending an independent investigation. Please leave the stage." Security guards, large men in black suits, stepped out from the wings. They didn't move toward me. They moved toward Wade. Wade looked at them. He looked at the crowd. He looked at the shareholders who were already on their phones calling their legal teams to file lawsuits. Then he looked at me. I was still standing in the aisle. I was still holding the envelope. Our eyes met. He looked like he wanted to kill me. He looked like he wanted to beg. But mostly, he looked like a man who realized he had underestimated the cost of everything. He was escorted off the stage. The camera crews that had been there to film his triumph turned to film his exit. The flashes went off like lightning. I lowered the envelope. My hand was shaking now, the adrenaline beginning to fade. Ava walked over to me. She put a hand on my shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. I looked at the empty stage where the Harmon Vertex logo still pulsed in blue. It was my design, but the man who had stolen it was gone. I turned around to face the room. The shareholders were shouting, arguing, making calls. It was chaos. It was the sound of an empire crumbling. I walked toward the exit. I passed Riley Shaw in the aisle. She was crying softly. I stopped. I reached out and touched her arm. "It is over." I said to her, "You don't have to be quiet anymore." She nodded, unable to speak. I pushed open the heavy doors and walked out into the lobby. The silence of the hotel corridor felt heavy, but it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the silence of secrets. It was the silence of a storm that has finally broken. I looked down at the envelope in my hand. It was wrinkled now. The corners were bent. It was just a piece of paper. Wade had thought it was a weapon he could use against me. He had thought he could trap me inside it. But he was wrong. I folded the envelope and put it back in my bag. It wasn't a trap. It was a receipt, and I had just cashed it in. My phone buzzed. It was Caleb. The SEC just issued a statement. The text read, "They are opening a formal inquiry into Harmon Vertex for securities fraud. It is done." I walked out into the bright Austin sunlight. I took a deep breath. The air tasted like heat and exhaust. But to me, it tasted like oxygen. I was broke. I was about to be divorced. I was facing a media circus. But for the first time in 7 years, I was free. 2 hours after the board of directors escorted Wade off the stage, his personal legal team summoned us to an emergency negotiation. We met in a sterile conference room at a different firm across town, far away from the cameras swarming the Harmon Vertex headquarters. The room smelled of leather and panic. Wade arrived 20 minutes late. He had lost the navy jacket he wore on stage. His tie was undone, hanging loosely around his neck like a broken noose. He looked 10 years older than he had that morning. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot. But he walked in with the same aggressive stride he always used. The stride of a man who believes there is no gravity that money cannot reverse. He did not apologize. He did not look at me with regret. He sat down heavily and nodded to his lawyer. Arthur. Arthur wasted no time. He placed a second envelope on the mahogany table. It was thick, heavy, and expensive. It sat there like a brick. "We are prepared to offer a comprehensive global settlement," Arthur said, his voice tight. "Inside is a check for $10 million. We are also prepared to transfer the title of the Westlake estate to your name immediately. $10 million. It was a fortune. It was enough to never work again. It was enough to disappear into a life of absolute luxury. However," Arthur continued, sliding the envelope toward me, "there are conditions. You will sign a retraction stating that your comments at the shareholder meeting were made under emotional duress and were factually incorrect. You will issue a joint statement with Mr. Harmon clarifying that the payments to Ms. Shaw were legitimate consulting fees that you misunderstood. You will withdraw your cooperation with the Securities and Exchange Commission immediately. The room was silent. Wade watched me, his eyes narrowing. He looked at the envelope, then he looked at me, waiting for the greed to kick in. He truly believed that everything was just a negotiation. He believed that my dignity had a price, and he had finally guessed the right number. I reached out and touched the second envelope. Then, I reached into my bag and pulled out the first envelope, the thin cream-colored one he had given me on the 47th floor, the one with the $75,000 check and the insult. I placed them side by side on the table, the thin one and the thick one. I looked at Wade. "You still do not get it, do you?" I asked softly. Wade sighed, an impatient, exhaling sound. "It is $10 million. Madison," he said, "take the win. Stop trying to destroy the company that paid for your life." I tapped the first envelope. "The problem is not the price. Wade, the problem is not that 75,000 was too low or that 10 million is high enough. The problem is that you used shareholder money to buy the silence of the woman you were sleeping with, and now, you are trying to use your personal money to buy a lie from your wife." Ava leaned forward, her voice sharp as a razor. "And frankly, Arthur," she said, looking at the opposing counsel, "this offer is not a settlement. It is witness tampering. The SEC has already opened a formal file. Offering $10 million to a key witness to retract testimony and withdraw from a federal investigation is a felony. You just handed us Exhibit B." Arthur went pale. He knew she was right. He had been so desperate to stop the bleeding that he had cut an artery. I pushed both envelopes back across the table. I stood up. "I am not signing anything." I said, "I am not retracting a single word. I am going to the SEC, and I am giving them everything. I am giving them the emails. I am giving them the metadata, and I am giving them both of these envelopes." Wade stood up, slamming his hands on the table. "You are going to walk away with nothing," he shouted, the veins in his neck bulging. "If you destroy me, the stock goes to zero. There is no payout. There is no settlement. You will burn the money just to burn me. Are you that stupid?" Just then, a sound filled the room. It was Wade's phone. It buzzed against the table. Then it buzzed again, and again. It was a continuous, frantic vibration. Wade looked down. He saw the notification. It was a message from his private banker. Noah had done his job. He had sent the logs of the Cayman Island transfers to the authorities an hour ago. Wade picked up the phone. His hands were shaking so hard he almost dropped it. He read the screen. They froze it. He whispered. His voice was barely audible. "They froze the accounts." He slumped back into his chair. The arrogance evaporated instantly, leaving behind a small, terrified man. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw reality hit him. He couldn't buy his way out. The currency he had used all his life was no good here. He looked up at me, his eyes wet. "What do you want?" "Madison?" he asked, his voice breaking. "I can't give you the money if they freeze it." "What do you want from me?" He still thought I wanted a transaction. He thought I wanted a pound of flesh. I looked at him, and I felt nothing. No love, no hate, just a profound sense of completion. "I do not want your money. Wade," I said, "I want the next woman who gets handed an envelope like this to know that she does not have to take it. I want to make sure that when a victim holds a hush money agreement, her hands do not shake the way mine did. I want them to know that the paper isn't a wall. It is a weapon, and I want you to watch me use it." I turned and walked toward the door. "Madison." "Wait," Wade called out, desperation in his voice. I didn't look back. Ava gathered our files and followed me. I walked out of the building into the warm Austin afternoon. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the pavement. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a text from Caleb, the journalist. "The commission just officially opened the investigation." The text read, "They have subpoenaed everything. The lead investigator told me that your NDA is a piece of art in the evidence file. They are going to use it to rewrite the regulations on corporate governance. I walked to my car. I drove back to the small rental apartment I had moved into. It wasn't a penthouse. It didn't have a view of the river, but it was mine. I set up my camera on the kitchen table. I placed the first envelope in the center of the frame. It wasn't a symbol of my humiliation anymore. It was a trophy. It was the stone that had brought down Goliath. I hit a record. I looked into the lens, speaking to the millions of people who were now following the story, waiting for the end. My billionaire husband hid $480,000 in work bonuses for her, then left me one envelope. He thought that envelope would lock my mouth. But sometimes, the thing they give you to make you silent is the exact thing that helps you make the whole world hear. Thank you so much for listening to this story and walking this path with me. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop your city or country in the comments below so we can connect. If you found strength in this story and want to support the channel, please subscribe to Zoe Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit the hype button so this story can reach even more people who need to know that their voice is powerful.